Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how humans evolve something as complex as music and language? It is pretty amazing, right? We have these incredibly rich ways of communicating that are passed down through generations. But how did we get here? Scientists have looked at what makes music and language universal across cultures, or where those abilities might have come from in other species. But there are still big questions like, when did these abilities first appear? In what order did they develop? And did music and language start from the same place? That is where this fascinating new research comes in. These scientists are proposing a new way to look at this with something called Evolutionary Systems Biology, combined with active inference, and ideas about how our brains develop and how we build our environments. They want to create a framework, a kind of roadmap to understand how all the different pieces of music and language evolution fit together. Essentially, they're saying that we can think of our brains and our environments as constantly influencing each other. Our brains use something called active inference to make sense of the world. And that is shaped by how our brains develop, especially during certain sensitive periods. And crucially, the environments we build, what they call the niche, can influence that development. This creates a cycle where our genes, our brain development, and our environment all work together over long periods of time to shape us. Think of it like this. Imagine a system that changes over time like a pendulum. The pendulum swings and eventually settles into a stable position like a valley. That stable position is called an attractor. In biological systems, these attractors represent stable states or behaviors. Evolutionary systems biology looks at how these systems change and evolve, creating different kinds of attractors or pathways. Now, how does this apply to our brains and how we learn things like music and language? Well, the researchers propose that we can use a similar idea called the free energy landscape to represent the brain's belief states. Imagine this landscape. The valleys represent beliefs that the brain thinks are likely, and the peaks represent uncertainty or surprise. When we get new information, our beliefs shift and we move across this landscape, trying to find lower energy states. This is how our brains update what they know. This is where the active inference framework comes in. It is a way to describe how our brains make predictions and update their internal models of the world. They explain that the generative model in active inference acts much like the epigenotype in evolutionary systems biology. It is the connection between our genes and the traits we develop. A really interesting part of this is the idea of sensitive periods in brain development. These are times when our brains are super flexible and can be shaped by our environment. The researchers suggest that during these sensitive periods, key parts of our generative model get tuned by the input we receive from our surroundings, which includes social interactions and cultural information. This means that the culture and the environment we grow up in can directly influence the biological building blocks of our minds, the cognitive traits that allow us to process music and language. This is a powerful idea because it links culture directly to biology in the evolutionary process. They then use this integrated framework to explore some specific scenarios about how music and language might have evolved. They propose looking at things like beat perception and synchronization and how that might relate to vocal learning. One scenario they discuss is inspired by research suggesting that the ability to perceive and synchronize to a beat, something we do when we tap our feet to music, might have evolved as a kind of accidental bonus from changes in the brain that were more directly related to vocal learning. They contrast this with other ideas, like the coordination conjecture, which suggests that beat perception evolved to help the brain coordinate different motor systems involved in speech. The key here is that their framework allows them to model these different evolutionary pathways. They can simulate how a collection of agents interact, how they build their environment, and how that influences the next generation. By exploring these different scenarios, they can see which evolutionary paths are most likely to have happened. The process they suggest involves several steps. First, they identify the key cognitive traits, like vocal production learning or beat perception. Then, they try to estimate how these traits were tuned in different species that might represent different stages in evolution. Next, they use computational models to simulate how these traits might have evolved over time, considering how agents interact and shape their environment. This involves calculating probabilities of different evolutionary transitions. The ultimate goal is to generate testable predictions. For example, they might predict that certain genetic or neurodevelopmental markers should be present in species that evolved particular traits in a specific order. So, what does this all mean? This research offers a really sophisticated new way to think about how something as complex and uniquely human as music and language could have emerged. By combining ideas from biology, neuroscience, and computational modeling, they're trying to move beyond just listing components and actually understand the dynamic processes that shaped us. It highlights the crucial interplay between our biology, our brains, and the environments that we create and inhabit. It suggests that evolution isn't just about genes changing randomly, but a complex dance between our internal makeup and the external world, played out over immense timescales. This framework is pretty mind-bending because it suggests that our culture isn't just tacked onto our biology. It has been an active participant in shaping it over evolutionary history. Now, a study like this is complex, and of course there are limitations. They're building models of extremely intricate processes, and it is hard to perfectly capture all the nuances of evolution. The simulations are based on educated guesses about our distant past. However, the strength of this approach is that it provides a structured way to test hypotheses and make predictions that can be experimentally investigated. It is not just speculation, it is a rigorous scientific program. Future research could involve refining these models with more data, perhaps looking at specific gene networks or brain activity patterns in different species. They could also try to run more complex simulations to explore even more scenarios. It is a really exciting direction that promises to unravel more of the mysteries of human evolution. This is the kind of research that makes you rethink what it means to be human and how we got to be this way. It's a reminder that our abilities from speaking to singing are deeply rooted in our evolutionary journey. So, what do you think about this new way of understanding music and language evolution? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dive into the fascinating world of science, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more breakdowns of groundbreaking research. We'll see you next time.